So I'm going to be exposing yet another racist. This time, the guy I'm exposing, his name is Naean Howlett-Foster. I have no idea who this guy is. I'm just going to call him Foster. He responded to my video where I exposed that bitch Miharu the Fox as a passive racist. Um, so I guess he's like some kind of white knight for her. Like I said, I have no idea who this guy is. He has some shitty YouTube channel. As you can see here, he has 2.3K subscribers. So I guess there are some people who watch his videos. Well, I'm sure they would be interested to learn that he is actually a passive racist. So let's get into his comments that he wrote. So a little backstory, real quick. I exposed Miharu the Fox as a passive racist because she rationalized and defended a person who took an indifferent stance against racism. I'll post a link to that full video in the description so you can check it out. I don't want to get into that here, but I want to get into this guy's comments because they are highly pernicious and very problematic because they're subversive in their racism. So he says, is passive insert item here the new microaggression? I don't even understand what that means. I guess he's trying to mock the term passive racism. And later on, he actually demonstrates he does not understand what passive racism is. Now, I'm not going to read his entire comment. He's saying, blah, blah, blah. What do you mean by being ignorant to what is offensive? This comes off to me as you're implying what is and isn't offensive is an objective thing, which would be very incorrect. Nowhere, nowhere ever did I ever say that offensiveness of any kind is objective. What offends people is not objective. Okay? I never claimed that. So that is called a straw man fallacy. It's when you put words in people's mouths and then you refute the straw man that you concocted of your own imagination. So the rest is just a babbling, nonsensical hodgepodge of idiocy and sophistry. So I'm not even going to waste my time reading any of it. I'm simply going to respond to the fallacy. I never said offensiveness is objective. That's a straw man fallacy. The rest of your post is babbling on about the straw man fallacy as well. However, if you do not consider racism to be offensive, you're probably a racist yourself, and I don't tolerate racists on my channel. So then this idiot responds and says, blah, 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 blah. The reason I was babbling on, blah, blah, blah. He's trying to rationalize all the babble that he was writing. I think racism is a very complex matter. Now, is racism a complex matter? Sort of. There is intricacies to racism, but also it's a very simple issue in whether or not it's right or wrong. So, I mean, whether or not racism is offensive is a separate issue from whether or not it is moral. And this is where I can definitively say that it is objectively immoral. And yes, you can have objective morality. Again, I'm not going to get into that. There are some videos you can find on YouTube which discuss how objective morality works. But yes, racism is demonstrably immoral. Um, then he does the whole "I'm not a racist, but," and then goes on to describe why he's a racist. Uh, blah blah blah. People should be judged by their actions and the content of the character, which most racists like to quote Martin Luther King Jr. While completely ignoring the main issues and the intricacies of his philosophy because they don't know much about Martin Luther King Jr. Not their skin color, and you'll notice he spells color in the British way, so this guy's a British piece of shit. And Britain was heavily racist, and their colonial activities uh, were heavily racist, where they exploited numerous countries for their own benefit, including India, where they stole literally trillions of dollars from India. But that's a separate issue. Um, do I consider racism to be offensive to me personally? This should be a clear-cut answer. It's not offensive to a racist, that's for sure. It depends on the scenario and the specific individual context. Honestly, doesn't even make any sense. For example, if a random anonymous person online says the N word in a trolling, reply baiting manner to a black person online and nothing happens, I would just find that daft, silly, or pointless, but not offensive. Yeah, that would make sense considering you're a white person. Now, watch this white person deny he's white. That's just someone using their free speech to be spicy. So he's doing the whole hiding behind free speech in order to minimize and rationalize racism. Whether or not something is covered under free speech has nothing to do with whether or not it is racist or offensive. So his opinion about the N word, I don't care what a white person's opinion about the N word is. I honestly do not give a fuck. However, to rationalize something that is blatantly racist, like the N word, the reason why the N word is racist is because of the historical usage of that word. And that word was, it originally meant, just a black person. However, because of its association with racism and oppression of black people and slavery in America, it became racist. And what a British person doesn't understand is that word um, is very particular to America. In other countries they use different racist words like kafir. So I often say, context and intent matter, but also content matters. And a white person, um, I do not care what a white person like thinks of the N word if they don't find it offensive. Of course you don't find it offensive because you have white privilege, you idiot. And then he goes on to babble about violence in a very different example. If a black person was deliberately physically attacked purely because of their skin color, then yes, I would find that offensive. Though to be fair, any act of violence I would be highly opposed to, as I believe disagreements and such should be handled via peaceful debates, discussion, and general dialogue. I absolutely hate the thought of people having bad blood between them and resorting to physical confrontations. So these are platitudes. These are platitudes that are usually uttered by passive racist people in general. In my experience, passive racists also tend to be they tend to espouse like a pacifist viewpoint. Okay, I've known a passive racist. Pacifism is utterly impractical anyway. So like he's saying he's opposed to any act of violence. Yeah, that's called pacifism. I don't agree with that. Violence, unfortunately, is sometimes necessary. In fact, every single society on Earth that is stable, and like pretty much every other unstable society on Earth too, practices violence in some form and controls its populace through a threat of force, and force is violence through use of law enforcement officers, police. Okay, yeah, guess what? I got news for you, you idiot. Pacifism is bullshit. You can't have a society that's pacifist. But what's more pernicious is the fact that he is essentially uh, taking away any racial component as being highly deleterious to a situation and then just making a general castigation against violence, meaning that he doesn't make any distinction between violence against black people on the basis of racial hatred or violence against a white person just because, violence against white people. In his, what he is implying is that they are both equally wrong. No, that is not true. One is worse than the other. Violence motivated by racial hatred is worse. So then I respond and I say, I'm not here to debate whether you think racism is offensive because I don't give a fuck about debating whether or not a white person thinks the N word is offensive. I say what you think about the N word and offensive or not is irrelevant. Whether something is covered under free speech has nothing to do with whether or not something is racist or offensive. There are plenty of things that are legal under free speech that are both racist and offensive. Hiding behind free speech to minimize or rationalize racism is racism. You come across to me as a passive racist yourself with your veiled defense of racism behind the auspices of free speech and your position on the N word. Also, your position of pacifism is highly irrational and impractical, as I talked about before. So, blah, 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 tries to say you don't understand me. No, I understood you just fine. Now, here he demonstrates he doesn't understand what passive racism means, but then simultaneously denies he's a passive racist. I am not a passive racist nor a racist in any other shape or form, and I firmly stand by that. I don't discriminate against anybody for any reasons, whether it be race or gender, etc. Um, blah, 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 blah. I'm not even going to waste my time reading the rest of this racist babble. Um, so passive racism does not mean you discriminate against someone on the basis of race. That's not actually what it means. Passive racism is a kind of complicated manifestation of racism in which you have racist biases that are unacknowledged, that in some way subverts the fight against racism and also helps racists. And it also includes a healthy dose of denying racism, which this guy does. So later on, he actually kind of reveals that. Uh, he's so no, actually, in the beginning of what he's saying, I'm not defending actual racism. So that's a key word there, actual racism. In his mind, his what he thinks is actual racism does not include calling black people the N-word, meaning it is defined very narrowly to only meaning violence against black people on the basis of skin color. But he also makes no distinction between violence against black people on the basis of skin color or any act of violence against anyone for any reason, meaning he does not find one to be worse than the other. So, yes, in his mind, racism does not even exist because he makes no distinction. Because in his, he's defining racism to only mean violence on the basis of skin color, and even then, he does not believe that is in any way worse than any form of violence. So that's the game that these passive racists do. They essentially deny the existence of racism entirely, right? It does not matter what he thinks is actual racism when he doesn't have a good fundamental understanding of what racism is, nor does he have a good understanding of what passive racism is. So he can't deny being a passive racist because, by definition, a passive racist does not actually understand what racism is, nor do they understand that they exhibit racist tendencies. So I quickly say to him, Negatory, I understood you just fine. You absolutely are a passive racist, nor do you even understand what passive racism means. Passive racism does not mean you discriminate on the basis of race. You need to look up what passive racism means before you deny being accused of it because you're sorely ignorant. Yes, you are defending actual racism. You merely are denying what actual racism is because you are a passive racist that defined racism narrowly. We're not cool, dude. I told him I'm going to make a video about him exposing this piece of shit because that's what we do here. We expose racists. So, like I said, I never heard of this guy before, but what I do is I like to expose racists wherever I see them, especially when their racism manifests as passive racism, because I feel like that's not called out enough. I do have some critiques about, the use of the N word and how we tend to be reactionary towards the N word, but to completely deny there being any racist connotations or offensiveness taken or the reasonableness of people being offended by the N word when it's especially when it's uttered by white people. Uh-uh. That's why I say context and intent matter, but also content matters as well, especially when it's coming from a white person from Britain, which has practiced colonialism. Anyway, that's it for tonight, guys. See you later.